Hello there, and welcome to the Cybiant webinar, an introduction to service automation. I'm incredibly excited that you have taken the time today to join our webinar today. Before we get started, let me first explain to you a little bit about how our system works. On the left-hand side, you see that you can ask questions. So if you have any questions during the webinar about any particular content, please feel free to ask them in the questions box, and then we'll get towards that towards the end of this session. This session will take around 30 to 35 minutes, and we will give you a firm introduction to service automation and the service automation framework in particular. So let's get started. Before we get started, let me take a brief moment to introduce myself. My name is Jan-Willem Middelburg, and I'm located in Kuala Lumpur. I'm also one of the authors of the Service Automation Framework, which provides the main reference methodology about service automation that we will talk to you about today. This book was published 3 years ago in 2017, and recently we've made a follow-up with the Enterprise Big Data Framework. So what we'll be talking about in the next half hour? In the next half hour, we have divided the content into a number of sections in this webinar. First of all, I will explain a little bit to you about what service automation is, and especially why it's such a popular topic today. Then we will move on to the business side of things. We talk about the key business drivers behind service automation and what it is, why companies can make a good return on their investments. After we've gone through the basic theoretical models, we will dive a little bit more into the technology. So next we will discuss how to set up self-service portals and what you could do in order to move towards an automated service delivery model. We will use the service automation framework in order to accomplish that. The last part of this webinar, we will discuss a case study. So we will see how the theory that we will discuss in the first 10 minutes will be applied into practice. For this particular case study, we have chosen a case that we did for a local government organization. So here we will talk you through the steps that you can take in a real life type of situation. I will end this webinar with a number of resources and downloads which you can download after this webinar in order to get started yourself. At the end, we will run through all the questions that were collected during the webinar, and I will have a short Q&A session. Please note that because of the number of participants in this webinar, you've all been placed on mute. So the only way in which you can ask questions is through the chat box, which you see at the left. I hope you find this program interesting, and I look forward to talking through the different steps with you. So let's get started with one of the most fundamental questions here. What is really service automation? In order to explain this, let's have a look at the following number of companies. What do all these organizations have in common? Companies like Grab or Booking or Geico or Netflix. What is it that makes all these companies so incredibly successful? All of the companies that you see on the screen in front of you, which have grown very rapidly, especially in the last decade, have one thing in common. They all work based on 100% automated services. They all provide services from beginning to end, whether it's hotel nights or taxi rides or even movies or series. All of these have a 100% automated delivery model. But what you can ask yourself is, did I ever speak to somebody who works at one of these organizations? And the answer to that is most probably no. The reason for this is because they deliver their services 100% automatically. From the first moment you start consuming the service all the way towards the end, you have a completely digital and automated service experience. Even if you would like to get support on certain aspects of the service, think about if you would like to get your money back or would like to issue a refund, even those steps are processed automatically. So that's one of the reasons or the main reasons why service automation is becoming popular. A lot of companies are looking to the way in which these successful companies deliver their services. And they look at a deeper level on what is it that makes these companies so incredibly successful. So let's proceed with looking a little bit further into the core aspects of this. What is it that makes an automated service? If we look at the official definition of service automation, we can see the following definition. A service automation, obviously, is the automated delivery of a service. What that means is from the beginning all the way to the end, your service is scripted into a workflow, to a number of steps that you go through in order to constitute a service experience. That does not necessarily mean that the service itself needs to be automated. A good example I always think is Grab, which we saw on the previous slides. The taxi ride that you take to get from point A to point B is still an analog service. You still need a car, you still need a driver, you need somebody with a license. So that is still something that needs to happen in the real world by real people. That also means that service automation does not necessarily mean that people are going to get out of a job. It's just a different delivery model. That automation always starts at the trigger by the user itself. And that is the second core aspect of service automation. Every service or service request is initiated by a user. Whether it's the request for a taxi, or starting a film or series, or making a hotel booking, the user is in charge. And that fundamentally changes the way that most organizations need to set up their delivery model. Instead of pushing their services into the market, they need to recognize that users are now in charge, and they need to design their services accordingly. The third part is, because we deliver services in that automated fashion, is that we need the technology in order to facilitate that. In service automation, we refer to that as self-service portal or self-service platform. Because we need this automated trigger, there will always be a point that a user needs to request that service, and that happens in an automated and a digital platform. We will have a look at one or two examples a little bit later in this webinar. And last but not least, in service automation, it's all about the digital experience. So we don't only want to make sure that companies or that customers are happy, we also want to make sure that they will come back a little bit later. So everywhere in the design, we need to ensure that we take the steps to deliver an optimal user experience. So now that you have a little bit of an understanding of what the definition is of service automation, let's look at some more practical examples. And let's start with answering the question, why so many organizations are nowadays interested in service automation. Well, if you think a little bit deeper about it, and you compare the 5 companies of which I've shown the logos on the early slides, then think about what is it that makes organizations successful that deliver in an automated fashion. If we dive a little bit deeper in that, we can find that there are 5 key business drivers which make it a very good investment for companies to start with service automation. First of all, if you deliver an automated service delivery model, it means that your business is highly scalable. If you have put the technology in place, meaning the workflows and the scripts in order to deliver your services, you can scale very, very rapidly. Because all you need to do is make sure that you connect more users to your product or service. And that is, I think, one of the key business drivers that make the companies that we've seen before so incredibly successful. They're frequently called digital disruptors because of their quick growth. But they would never have been able to scale so rapidly if it weren't for service automation. They just need to have a system in place by which they can augment very rapidly. The second part today is, of course, also very important. If your users interact with your company and service in a digital way, it means that you can track every single thing that they do. And that gives you an incredible amount of insight. And you can use that insights to start making data-driven decisions. So that will increase the value of your service over time. You have more information than your competitors. The third topic I already introduced a little while ago. In service automation, the user is central. You need to recognize that he or she is taking the decisions in service automation, and you need to design your service accordingly. For most companies, this represents a different way of thinking. Fourth, automation also means that you can save on unnecessary costs. And notice that I did not say that with automation, jobs will get lost or we need to lay off people. It's just a completely different delivery model. It makes sure that repetitive tasks and things that require a lot of manual work get done automatically. So companies free up resources to do things that are more productive and add more value to their services. Last but not least, service automation also provides a good framework to consistently exceed user expectations. In the end, if you deliver a digital and automated service, you need to make sure that your users come back. So they don't only need to appreciate your service and like it, they actually need to love it in order for them to come back. So these are some of the key reasons why organizations nowadays invest in service automation and why they are moving forward with an automated delivery model. So what is then the service automation framework, which is a very particular approach to how you deal with the delivery of automated services? So here's a screenshot of the service automation framework Wikipedia website on how it's been described by the industry. Service automation framework is a set of best practices for the automated delivery of services. It really builds further on existing self-service practices in ITIL and IT service management. So it's kind of like an extension to that. The only difference is that this framework focuses completely and only on the automated delivery of services. So what are the steps that you need to take in order to get through that? That's what we discuss in the service automation framework. And I'm happy that I've been the author of the official textbook on which the courses that we discuss now have been based. The service automation framework really came to life because of an industry request. We were working on a number of projects in which the clients asked us whether we could provide a digital and automated service delivery model. And we could not find any core guidance, best practices, or processes that could really fill in this need. And because we couldn't find any, we did the project as good as we could at that particular moment, and we learned a lot in that process. And that's why we started to write all of those things down, and that resulted in the book, The Service Automation Framework. So how does the framework look like? The framework is a very structured approach in order to automate existing services. So it's a great tool for companies that are already providing services on a day-to-day basis and want to take the next steps in order to automate them. And that's what the service automation framework is. On the slide in front of you, you see the 6 core building blocks of the service automation framework. And the whole model starts from the inside out. We will first start with discussing user requirements and user needs. And that's what you see in the middle. Remember that earlier I told you that an automated service is always triggered by the user. And that's what you see here. So in order to design a good automated service, we first really need to understand who is our user, what are their preferences, and how do they initiate certain service requests. If we know our users, we can subsequently design the services around that. And that's what you see in the second layer of service design. Here we will envision and describe how our services need to be designed so that we can provide them in an automated delivery model. Of course, we will always also need a technology layer, and that's the third layer that you see in the center. This is the way through which the user interacts with the service provider. it always goes through a self-service portal or technology interface. The three outer building blocks that you see have all to do with processes. Because a service is always process-oriented, you need to still provide support, very similar to other methodologies like ITIL or IT service management. Things can happen while a service is being delivered. Think about the example of Grab that I gave earlier. It might well be the case that while you are in a taxi, you would like to change the direction of your car, or you would like to put in a different destination. That is a service request. It's a change of service whilst you are consuming the service. So the service automation framework also takes into account existing processes to make sure that the services still are delivered in a smooth and efficient manner. And that's what the processes are all about. In today's webinar, we don't have the time to dive into all of these individual processes in depth, but at the end of this webinar, I will give you a number of very good resources where you can learn more about this. So what is then the objective of service automation? Why do we want to know more about this, and why do we want to take those 6 steps that we've just talked about? If you look at the left-hand side of this slide, you see what I refer to as a traditional service delivery model. At the bottom, you see customers, and they interact with the service provider, which is depicted at the top layer, in an iterative and sequential approach. Think, for instance, if you would like to book a taxi. You first request a taxi, then the driver comes, then you step in, then you complete the ride. After you've completed the ride, you give a rating. You also need to make a payment, so your credit card is charged. So this is a very iterative and sequential process. And this is how most companies nowadays operate. Whether you go through a government organization to request a new passport, or you book a flight, all of the services that are delivered by service providers happen in a sequential nature. What we would like to do with the service automation framework is move from the situation that you see at the left towards the situation that you see at the right. And the main difference between the picture on the left and the picture on the right is that there is now a self-service interface which is integrated between the user and the service delivery provider. Again, this does not necessarily mean that there's no human contact anymore. So in a very similar case where we talk about taxis, the ride will still be done by a driver, by an actual person. You just see that every other step along the way, from the booking process all the way to the payment process, is done automatically. And that is what service automation can offer. It provides you with the steps in order to move from the situation at the left towards the situation at the right. And a little bit later in this webinar, we'll see how that works in an actual case study example. So here you see again the self-service portal in the middle. So let's have a bit of a review of what is the benefit of service automation and how does this work in an actual case study. So the case study that I'm presenting today is how local government organization can use service automation in order to deliver the services that they provide to their citizens in an automated fashion. Before we dive into that, let's review the role of a local government. Local governments in almost any country have a very similar purpose. It is to take care of their citizens. And traditionally, the purpose of local governments can be subdivided into 2 core elements. The first purpose is to represent and involve citizens in determining specific local public needs and how those local needs can be met. That is the policy part of a local government. And this is very different for different regions and different countries, depending on the nature of their cities. However, local government also always has a secondary role. And that second purpose is to provide the administrative services and supply goods and services that citizens can depend on. I already gave you the example of, for instance, requesting a new passport. But the same is true for collecting the trash, requesting permits, moving citizens between different locations. All of these have an administrative function that needs to be provided by a government. Those services, because they are very repetitive, happen all the time, can be automated. And in this case study, we will look a little bit further at what are the needs or the process that local governments can go through in order to use or in order to start delivering automated services towards the citizens. I've chosen this specific example because I think everybody can easily understand how this works, because we are all in contact with local governments in one way or the other. Whether you would like to renew your driver's license or would let the government know that you require a new passport, all of us have to deal with local governments once in our lifetime. So in this example, we will see what the steps are in order to use the service automation framework to deliver those automated services. Let's have a look. On the slide in front of you, you see a typical setup of a local government. A local government needs to provide a lot of services to their citizens, which you see at the bottom. The local government, as such, acts as a single point of contact for all of the citizens in the city. Whether those citizens are very young or very old, whether they are well educated or not, whether they have been living in that particular city for years, or they have just recently arrived. So what the government needs to do is provide an interface for those citizens. Through that interface, they carry out a number of different roles. Some of those roles have been mandated by regional governments or higher levels of governments, but can also be coming from external contractors. On the right-hand side of this screen, you see the number of different types of services that governments provide. So these are typical things like parking services, housing, civil services, education, etc., etc. The number of services here is not so much important. It just shows that there are different types of categories that citizens will request. What citizens won't like is that if they need to go to a different government department every single time they need to request a service. So for citizens, it is very, very important that there is a single point of contact every time they would like to get something from the government. So that's a current situation. And in most cases, it means that you as the citizen need to go towards an office in order to request something. Through service automation, this can be done a lot more efficient. So the situation that we would like to get to is that that single point of contact is now provided by a self-service portal, and in this case it's called a citizen portal, through which the citizens can interact with the government in a very structured and easy manner. And every time they review or request a new service, they can go to that particular portal, no matter whether they are asking for parking services or, for instance, waste management. All of that can be included into a single portal, which forms the primary interface between the government on the one hand side as the service provider and the citizen at the other side, which functions as a user. So here again, we have a very similar situation between a traditional situation and a desired or automated situation. So how do we get there? How can a government really achieve this? A lot of books have been written about this. In some countries, they call it things like e-government or government as a platform, digital transformation, citizens applications. All of these are terms that you hear a lot in connection with an automated delivery model in the form of government. So what we did is that we used service automation and the service automation framework to tackle this particular framework, or to tackle this particular problem. We have found that although many people talk about the automation or the digital transformation of governments and how this and how they should do this, that there is very, very little guidance on what are the concrete or logical steps that a government should take in order to do this. So what we did in a number of cases is use the service automation framework in order to go through these particular steps. The second reason why we've chosen the service automation framework is that it provides a very practical approach. And I will show you in the next slide a number of the steps that you can go through. The service automation framework goes through each of those 6 steps in a sequential nature. And for organizations that have current services at this particular moment, this really provides practical guidance on how they can transform that analog service towards a fully digital service experience. So how does that work? In the next slide, you see some of the steps towards service automation. And those are the 6 steps that governments run through in order to get there. So let's review all of those one by one. First of all, in order to start delivering automated services, you first need to define what a service is, and then particularly from a user point of view. So although most governments pretty well know what they do on a day-to-day basis, they never thought about how that service is experienced from a user point of view. What are the things that trigger a particular service, and how are different people triggering that service simultaneously? So let's review a specific example here. In a traditional service provider, for example, we see that, for instance, they are responsible for the distribution and renewal of parking permits for its residents. That is a phrase that we found in an original service catalog, something that the city does for its citizens on a day-to-day basis. However, if we now translate that particular service into a user-centric view, meaning you as the user would like to do something, it starts to look a little bit different. It starts to look like this. As a service or as a citizen of this particular city, I would like to request and renew my parking permits and submit changes in case I buy a new car. Why is this a good starting point? Well, if you look at the second definition, you can already see a number of very different changes. First of all, it shows that there should be a process for the standard way of delivering that service, is issuing a parking permit. But you can also see that you need to think about secondary processes. For instance, what if somebody buys a new car? How should we alter or change the process so this is adequately reflected from a government point of view and the resident doesn't get his parking permits? So this is a really new thing or a new way of looking at services that a particular organization provides. And that is sometimes a bit of a mind shift that most companies need to make. After we know those particular services from a user point of view, the second step is to compose a service catalog. The reason we would like to define those service catalogs is because different categories of services are frequently executed by different people. Especially in larger organizations like a government or an enterprise organization, not all services are delivered by different people. For instance, if you would like to provision a new virtual machine, you would need to be with an IT team. However, if you would like to request a new parking permit, you would probably need to be with civil or parking services. So the reason that we would like to split those services into different categories and group them together is because it makes it clear who is responsible for the execution. So in order to do that, we can set up different service catalogs within the self-service platform. That is not to say that we will make different platforms each time. We all work together, but there's different separation of teams. After we've done that, the next step is to make a service automation blueprint for every individual service. And the generic structure of a service automation blueprint is shown in this particular slide. This is an example for how to request passports. At the top of the slide, you see a number of user actions, and those are the triggers that users take in order to request or a particular service. So the first block that you see at the top left is, for instance, file a new passport request. They communicate with the government, in this case, through something which is called the self-service platform, and that's the layer that you see in the middle. At the bottom side, we have the government's point of view. And here we need to provide the processes in order to make sure that the requests that are filed by the users are being filed up. So for instance, an ID verification check or the passport production process. All of these things need to be triggered automatically in the self-service portal. The secondary nature or the function of this particular portal is that it also needs to communicate back to the users. And this is something that is frequently forgotten. In the service automation framework, we refer to this as physical evidence. That could be emails, physical letters, or evidences that something is happening in the backend. You can really think about how you experience this by yourself. If you are ever on an online portal and you click on something and you don't get a confirmation, it shows that they really have not thought about this particular aspect of a service experience. So this is the concept of service automation blueprinting on a very, very high level. But today we unfortunately don't have the time to go into further detail about that. So step 3 is to compose a service automation blueprint for every one of these individual services. Next, as soon as we have those blueprints, we can translate them into the self-service portal. What that means is that we will build workflows and scripts that translate the blueprints into actual code. So that at the one end, we have a self-service portal, and that can trigger certain workflows or actions that are subsequently handled at the backend. So in the example here, you see an example, and this is from the city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. That's where I'm originally from, on how this is done. And here you can already see some of the earlier examples that I shown you. You see that there's a category for parking, or you see that there's a separate category for civil affairs. In technical terms, each of these building blocks are different service catalogs that are behind the first interface. It's all condensed, but it's a particular one-stop shop or one-stop single point of contact platform where citizens can arrange all their services. And by setting it up this way, it provides clarity to the citizens at the one hand, but it also provides the government, and in this case, the city of Amsterdam, with all the different workflows together so that they can exactly see what is happening in the city. So that's step 4, to translate the service automation blueprints that we've seen earlier into an actual technology platform. After we have done that, the next step is also very, very important, and that is to make sure that people will actually use the self-service platform. And that can be done very, very easily, because one of the great benefits of delivering an automated service is that it's available 24/7. So that means that if you would like to request a parking permit in the weekend or late at night, that probably the government office is not going to be open. However, the service automation portal and where the services are delivered is going to be open. So by this way, you can encourage citizens to start using that portal actively. It is critical to success from our experience that awareness is being generated on how the portal works, what the benefits are. And as soon as people started to use it once, then they will become more confident to use it a second time. But you really need to think about how do people use that on a day-to-day basis. Last but not least, as soon as you have your self-service portal live, you can start to think about the things that you can do in order to make sure that people will have a very positive user experience. And in the service automation framework, we have referred to this as serendipity management. Serendipity means something good that you didn't expect. And because you collect all the data within the self-service portal, it starts to build up data and insights that you can subsequently act upon. So if a particular service, for instance, is barely requested, it might be an indication that there's something wrong with the process or that it's not straightforward for citizens to use. And this way, you can improve your services over time every single day. Serendipity management, in my experience, is one of the primary reasons why a lot of organizations are choosing service automation, because they have also found a way to structurally increase quality over time. So that's serendipity management. So I see that the next slide is a bit skewed, but these are the 6 steps that are taken in order to move and use the service automation framework into real life. So this is a very brief overview and a small introduction to what the service automation framework is and how it can be used in an actual live case study. So if you found this webinar interesting and would like to know a little bit more about what service automation is and how it, in this case, particularly can be used, I highly recommend the following 2 downloads, which are available for free on the service automation website. The first one provides you with a generic overview of what service automation framework is, what are the 6 key building blocks of the framework, and discusses some techniques like blueprinting that we've just seen. This is a 6-page white paper and provides you with a generic introduction. I based the first half of this webinar mainly on the content that is in this particular white paper. The second white paper that you see at the right is an actual case study. So this white paper explains in more detail what are the steps that local governments can take in order to provide a case study on how they can automate their services. So if you're more interested in that particular area, I highly recommend that you download this one. Both are available on the service automation website. This is also a very sneak preview of what you will learn in an actual service automation course. So after the book was launched, there was so much demand for service automation that we thought to translate this into a training course that talks for 2 days about how you can use the theory that we've just discussed into real practice. So in the service automation framework training, we will discuss the practical elements of service automation, and we will start building those examples that we've seen before, like blueprints by ourselves. So at the end of this training, you are able to apply the knowledge of the service automation framework into your own organization as well. I've been scheduled to deliver 2 training courses in the next few months. So if you're located in the Singapore region, I'll be in Singapore on 23rd and 24th of September in order to deliver the next class. And if you are located in the Kuala Lumpur region, I'll be here in Kuala Lumpur from 8 to 9 October also to do a service automation class. It's a 2-day, very intense program, but at the end of the second day, we will immediately take the exam, so you will go home with an officially recognized certification from APMG. If you'd like to have a bit more information on the content of the program, costs, availability of seats, etc., then you can go to the link that you see on the slide in front of you, and that's where you can find all the information about the particular program. Last but not least, I've seen a number of questions come in during the webinar, so we will take a moment to answer the Q&A for the next 5 minutes. First question that I received was, how can I convince my boss to take this course? Well, I think that's a very interesting question because, of course, a training requires a certain investment, and I think that's also immediately the answer to your question. In this case, show your boss the slides that I've just presented, and then particularly the one that shows the business case or the business drivers. As soon as your boss starts to understand that service automation is a completely new delivery model through which he is able to generate more revenue quicker and with more insight, I think then it's going to be a very easy return on investment to make in order to let you participate in this course. The second question I received says, can you apply the framework in any organization or only in government? Or is there a specific industry that it works best? Well, the answer to that is very simple. The framework has been set up in such a way that it's applicable to any organization. But of course, the organization needs to deliver services. So the service automation framework works best in organizations that have many repetitive services that are happening quite a number of times. So personally, I've done projects in governments, in insurance, banking, and oil and gas, because these are companies that have very number of repetitive services where you can make quick wins with service automation. Third question that I have is, how can I apply the service automation framework in automating alert monitoring? Well, I think that's a very good question. Alert monitoring is also a service. So what that means is that the user that you saw on the service automation blueprint all the way at the top needs to be informed in case something is wrong. So the same structure, the alerts that you need to receive as a user need to be coming back. So you also would like to make sure that as soon as that alert has been followed up on or has been resolved, that is communicated back to the platform. So even though the request might not be initiated by a human being in this case, but a particular sensor, it means that you can still use the service automation blueprinting approach in order to design how this should be incorporated into the technology. So alert monitoring is, I think, a very interesting example for that. Next question I received is, will the service automation framework replace service desks? The answer is partly yes, partly no. I think more and more people are more comfortable with requesting services in an automated fashion because they have access to applications and smartphones. So it becomes more second nature to request services through an interface. So maybe the first line of support, which is traditionally by phone calls, will reduce a little bit, but it also means that you free up time that is then can be allocated to make sure that those services are subsequently delivered in a more efficient way. So it's never going to completely replace service desks. I do think that automation will, however, will make especially the first line of services a little bit more efficient. Next question that I received is from Ibrahim. Is the service automation can only be general services, or does this link with customized services? The answer to this is it is both. So customized services are equally services than a generic service. So I even think that a customized service might be even better because it's more specific. Any service that's being delivered, whether it's small or large, can be automated in at least in part. So that's I think the main answer to that question. It really doesn't matter how complicated or how simple the service is. As long as you can break it down into a number of steps, you can do that. And I again think about the example I gave earlier about Grab. It can be a very long service or a very short service, but all the repetitive elements of that service can be eliminated and can be automated. And almost every service, whether it's an accounting service or an IT service, will have these particular elements. So general or customized doesn't really matter. The next question is from Malhi, and he says, if my organization maturity is not up to automation level yet, what should I do? And secondly, can we build automation in business processes? It is not only via technology. Let me start with the answer to the second question first. That is, of course, definitely, because service automation in itself is a part of business processes. Because if you review the service automation blueprint that I've shown you earlier, that is a business process. So what we will do in the service automation framework is model business processes, but make sure that the delivery is done through an automated fashion. So that's the answer to the second part of your question. The answer to the first part is, if my organization maturity is not up to it, can I still start? The answer is yes. In the case study that I've shown you just now from a local part of from a local government, this government was also nowhere near at a maturity level where this could be instigated. But the answer to that question is, start with a small project. Start with a service that is very easy to automate and that can immediately show business value to the rest of the organization. Whether it is, for instance, in IT with provisioning virtual machines, or in a government with parking permits, which are also pretty straightforward. If you start with a very small project and people start to see the value of automation, you will immediately see that there will be a lot of interest in order to proceed with that. The next question is, I have a lot of questions today, so 2 more to go. Is the service automation blueprint a must in developing service automation? The answer is yes, even if it's a very simple blueprint, but the blueprint provides you with the methodology to translate a service towards an automated service. Because remember, in the end, with automated services, your service needs to be translated into workflows and scripts. There's no other way to do it, because otherwise it cannot be automated. That's a core property of automation, is that you need to have a technical component. So the blueprinting part is a visual technique that makes it easy to execute that process. So the answer there is yes, it's highly recommended that you must develop a service automation blueprint in order to automate the respective service. Next question is, will you learn how to use blueprinting during the course as well? Answer is, of course, yes. This is a very fundamental element of the course itself. So in the course, especially at the end of the first day, we will practice with drawing up those blueprints by yourself, so you get some actual case study materials in order to build your own blueprints. Last question came in here now. Can you give us examples of service automation technology? The answer is yes. There are a number of very good platforms out there that can provide you with the technology that is required in order to deliver service automation technology. The Service Automation Framework is a vendor-independent organization, so we don't really recommend particular methodologies or particular tools. If you have more questions about that at the end or after this webinar, feel free to send me an email, and I will talk you through a couple of examples that are related to your industry, because we see that most particular service automation tools or technology are very much related to particular industry. So quite a lot of questions today. I hope that I have adequately answered all of them. I think it's really good that there are so many requests for questions and answers, so that makes it very good. I'd like to thank you for participating in this particular webinar today. If you would like to follow up with me after the webinar, please feel free to call our office or visit our website. We're available at cybiant.com, or send us an email at Cybiant or info@cybiant.com. Or if you're in the Kuala Lumpur area, come and visit our office. We're located at the Redency Tribeca on Jalan MB, which is in the center of town. Thanks again so much for participating in this webinar today. I hope you found it very informative and useful. I know it's just a very sneak preview of what service automation is all about, but I definitely hope that I generated your interest today. Thank you so much, and I'll hopefully see you again on one of our next webinar series.